Good afternoon from London, and a very big welcome to our global audience, wherever you might be connecting to the stream today. We're delighted to be hosting this conversation and to have convened a panel that is absolutely bursting with expertise. My name is Louise Shaxson. I'm the Director of the Digital Societies Programme here at ODI, and I'm going to be chairing today's webinar, which is part of a series of events focused on young people's engagement with digital technologies. And these events have been hosted over the last year through the Youth Forward Learning Partnership, building on a 7-year initiative that's supported by the MasterCard Foundation, which aims to improve youth livelihoods in sub-Saharan Africa. And last July, there was an online global consultation which explored how young people and youth-focused initiatives use technology to respond to the pandemic. And more recently, there was a second consultation focused on digital innovation and resilience. And what we found from those two consultations was that young people are using technology very creatively to come up with solutions to local problems and to adapt and innovate in a time of crisis brought about by the pandemic. But of course, as I think we all know, infrastructure gaps, there are data costs, there's unequal access to tech devices and unequal access to training, and that restricts young people's internet exposure and the development of their digital skills. And what the young people highlighted to us in those consultations was that across many African countries, digital innovation ecosystems remain unevenly developed and under-resourced. And so in this context, I think perhaps the big question is, how can we prepare young people for the future of work? And more importantly, how can their experiences be harnessed to design policy that supports digital innovation for youth and by youth? I mean, there are tech hubs from Nairobi to Addis Ababa to Cape Town are flourishing. JobTech platforms are playing a central role in this emerging digital ecosystem. And actually, COVID-19 has really catalyzed the growth of the African gig economy. And this is helping young people find work and innovate and build their businesses. But there's a lack of protection for digital workers, and there are still stubborn inequalities that persist. And young people they're not only tomorrow's innovators, they're today's leading tech users. So their needs and their experiences have a critical role to play in shaping our digital future. And that's what this webinar is about. So we're going to hear from leading players in the job tech and innovation space to learn what can be done to ensure that the advantages of technology can benefit everyone. Before we begin today's session, I'm really happy to share that we've had over 260 people sign up for this from over 20 countries, which is making this a truly global conversation. And we would like to encourage plenty of exchange between our wonderful audience and the star speakers that we've got for you. So please, there's a Slido box below this live stream, and please use that to send in your questions to our guests, and we'll come to those during the Q&A segment. So we're going to have speakers first and then a Q&A segment. So hold your questions. You can direct your questions to each speaker, but if you don't mind just popping them in the chat, and then we'll be able to get to them when we get to the Q&A. And if you're on Twitter, we will be live tweeting from the Digital Society's ODI account, and we're just posting the Twitter handle in the chat box now. So do tag us and join the conversation. So let's get started. Very excited to introduce our first speaker, who's Bethlehem Desi. And Bethlehem is an Ethiopian web and mobile technologies developer and a tech activist, and she's currently chief advisor at Hyperlocal, which is an AI research and development company. We've just lost Bethlehem from the video. I hope we can get her back. I'm going to carry on talking about her in the hope that we'll get her back. Where was it? Hyperlocal. Yes, so Hyperlocal is it's an AI research and development company based in Addis Ababa. And Bethlehem is also founder and CEO of Hyperlocal Anyone Can Code, which is a company with a mission to create a tech ecosystem where young children are provided with the skills needed for the 21st century. And since March this year, Bethlehem has also been an advisory board member of Africa No Filter. And this is a donor collaborative that supports the development of some very nuanced and contemporary stories that sort of shift stereotypical and harmful narratives within and about Africa. And in 2018, Bethlehem was named the youngest pioneer in Ethiopia's fast emerging tech scene by CNN. And these are some pretty impressive accolades, Bethlehem. So we're delighted to have you with us. And so given all of that experience and your expertise, what do we need to do to support all young people so that they can develop the critical skills early on in their lives that will enable them to fully and effectively engage with data and technology? Let me start by asking you that.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to be part of this webinar. So in order to give the full picture, I want to give you a bit more context about how we came about creating iCoG Anyone Can Code. So iCoG Anyone Can Code is a subsidiary of iCoG Labs, which is an artificial intelligence and robotics research company based in Ethiopia. We're famously known for our contribution for Sophia the robot. And we also work with a lot of international organizations and companies in developing AI tools for them. So when I first actually was introduced to iCoG Labs, my intention was to go there and, knowledge transfer, build AI tools, build great things. But eventually what we understood was it was becoming harder and harder for us to scale, not because we couldn't find clients from abroad, but because the talent pool we had was not enough for our needs. Mind you, this is a very high-end kind of skill sets we need in artificial intelligence development and robotics. So we said, no, we already have this internship program going on, which we bring in a lot of interns from different universities in Ethiopia, and we conduct a 6-month kind of training using different online courses. But out of the 100 people that were coming in, only 1 or 2 would remain. So we said, okay, what's the real problem? Why aren't this youth having those skill sets that we need in order to deliver these global products that we have? So we said, okay, let's go back to the universities and see what kind of problems they're facing. So one of the first programs we launched is actually a Robo soccer competition where, robots would play soccer because soccer is the most loved game in Ethiopia, sport in Ethiopia. And we said, okay, how can we integrate that fun element into tech and also interest the youth in that? But we also saw that it doesn't only start there. The problem doesn't only come from there. We understood that the critical thinking skills we need, the problem solving skills and analytical thinking skills needed to be developed at a very younger age. So that's why we started iCoG Anyone Can Code. It was with the belief that we need to give opportunity to young people, especially children, to have the necessary skill sets to compete in the 21st century. And when we talk about the 21st century, we don't necessarily know what jobs are going to be created, what things are going to come up, but what we know for sure is that we need to know how to learn. We need to know how to solve problems we're faced with. So that was the main idea when we started iCoG Anyone Can Code. So as I mentioned, the initial problem was to kind of find our talent source. And we knew that, teaching children would be kind of a long-term plan. But we also thought, we're not going to hire all of these people who are going to come out of the program. Some of them need to become innovators. Some need to work in other companies. But how do we encourage also innovation and entrepreneurship through the programs we develop? So based from our own personal experiences and the different work that we do, we said, okay, how can we have the best impact possible? And the best way to do that was to have decentralized access to technology education. This meant providing platform, providing training, providing support and resources for youth and kids outside of Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia. So that's how all of this started. And because of this, we have learned a lot of things, is that the youth and the kids just need an opportunity. They just need someone to say, okay, here's a platform for you to grow. Here's a platform for you to create, and they'll be able to utilize it to create amazing innovations and unique solutions. So yeah, that's kind of our journey and how we become to kind of better understand how to involve the youth in the creation and innovation process.
That's super interesting, Bethlehem, and I like the point that you're making about how young people are, they're really making sort of unique solutions. And I'm presuming that, there's quite a difference between urban and rural areas, and so it's the locality of the solutions that's also important. And if you're talking about solutions being local, how can we then ensure that the youth voice is heard, that the rural youth voice is heard, as well as the urban youth voice? And young people are more meaningfully involved in shaping policy around sort of digital entrepreneurship and job creation. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to give a bit more context about what we mean by local solutions, I want to give you this example of a young Ethiopian who came about this product. So through our programs, we deliver design thinking skills, also business development skills. And one of the tools he developed was kind of an Uber for milk kind of solution. So what the solution the problem he saw was, okay, he would go to the city, ask for a latte, but they would tell him, oh, there's not enough milk, so we cannot serve you any of that. But he knows that back home that there's a lot of milk that's going bad, and there are a lot of people who are not getting customers to buy their milk. So basically what he did was he collected the data, the location of the people who are producing milk, and he calculated the shortest distance to collect that milk, and then he was able to make a business of delivering those milk and making a living for himself. So it's kind of interesting to see what kind of solutions this youth come up with, because usually it's always like, okay, here's the solution, and use the solution and then maybe customize it. It's not usually, okay, here are the tools for you to create the solution. Here is the resources you need for the solution. And I think because of these programs, we didn't exactly tell them, oh, you have to do this and that, but we said, okay, here are the skill sets you need. Here are the solutions, the tools that you need to create the solutions, because we don't really understand the problems unless we live in it. And I think that's a very important part of empowering the youth to become creators, empowering the youth to, speak up their voices and come up with solutions. Because nowadays you need courage to actually come up with any type of startup or any type of technology solution, because there's a lot of them being created, a lot of them being innovated in ecosystems that are much larger, much older, Silicon Valley or anything in Europe or in China. But when you look back and see the kind of solutions that the youth are creating, we need to provide them with ecosystems that are sustainable and that are very supportive to their creative process.
And thank you, Bethlehem, and that's a brilliant introduction for our next speaker, Nekesa Were. And I think she's going to have quite a lot to say about, to add to what you've just said. So Nekesa is the Director of Strategy at Afrilabs, and she's responsible for developing and executing the strategy to ensure a thriving innovation economy in Africa. And driven by the pretty impressive power of the Afrilabs network of 268 innovation centers in 49 African countries. I think I've got that right. And Nekesa also works as a strategy advisor at SMDBX, and this is a collection of SME experts who are working together to ensure sustainable growth for SMEs across Africa. So combining this tech and this enterprise approach. And I should say that prior to this, Nekesa was actually managing director of iHub Nairobi, and she led an open innovation culture that was integral in ensuring the quick maturity of Kenya's innovation ecosystem. So fantastic, I think, moving on from Bethlehem to Nekesa. And Nekesa, I've got a specific sort of question for you, which is, you provide leadership on several boards. So you have a really good oversight of the system, and the system that Bethlehem talks about, needing to be developed. So from that perspective, what do you think are the key roles that hubs and innovation centers can play in creating these sorts of changes? And how can they best support young people to be innovators?
Thanks, Louise, and it's a pleasure to be here. So hubs serve several roles. I think today, when we talk about hubs and restrict them to the number of startups that come out of them, most of the successful startups, we are doing them a huge disservice. For close to 2 decades now, within the African context at least, we've had hubs that have existed in one form or another. 15, 20 years ago, I imagine they existed mostly within corporates as that place where a lot of innovation happened for an organization. But as time went on, especially 10, 11 years ago, we began to see a lot of independent hubs come up. And by independent, I mean that they were not necessarily affiliated to universities or to large corporates and so on. And what has happened with this rise of innovation hubs, and depending on which study you read, there's close to 700 innovation hubs across the African continent, is many of them have come out of a need to have neutral spaces where innovators can congregate. And for me, I like to relate this to when I was growing up and we had football matches that would happen after school and over the weekends. And yes, it was great football that was happening, but also it was more than the football. It was about what happened when people went to watch the football or went to play the football. And so for people like me who weren't necessarily playing, it was about who I met, what I learned. And so as the youth convened in those spaces, then other people began to realize that is a place that attracts youth to it. And so we should take advantage of it. And so then you had food vendors coming to sell, their food, or you had people running programs for youth coming to talk about their programs at these matches. And I feel as though that kind of translates to what hubs are now and what they have been for close to 10, 11 years across the African continent. They're that place where you're more likely going to find that demographic of youth, not only youth, but, for purposes of this conversation, that demographic of youth that you want to interact with, that potentially are wanting to build solutions, but are just looking for different kinds of support that they can use to build those solutions. And so a lot of youth that are going into hubs are looking for opportunity. They're looking for networks. They're looking for safe spaces where they can begin to explore their ideas. And this is the benefit that I feel that hubs have for many years now been bringing to ecosystems. They are that place, and I like to say it's the place where you leave your title at the door. It's a convening space. And so it doesn't matter whether you're an 18-year-old innovator or whether you're a 50-year-old CEO of a corporate. Many times when you walk into a hub, it's about what innovative idea are you bringing to the table, or what kind of support are you bringing to kind of build out that innovative idea. Are you open to collaboration? A lot of the hubs that exist now, one of their core values is open collaboration, open innovation. And what that means basically is that you understand that good ideas are going to come from anywhere and you're open to that, right? And so whether you're a CEO sitting at the table, whether you're 18-year-old with an idea that you want to explore, whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're in primary school or secondary school, hubs have become that place where everyone comes with what their idea is and the way that they want to support that idea. And then there's great collaboration working. And this is what hubs bring to the table for me. And so there's startups, yes, for sure, because everyone wants a successful startup. But then there's also the relevant skill that you get taught, and Bethlehem spoke to this as well. When you walk into a hub, if you're not looking to build a startup, you're more perhaps also looking to hone your skills. And so there's lots of courses that are taking place in innovation hubs. Right now, as Afrilabs, we're working on a lean data module that we want to introduce to our hubs and to the entrepreneurs that they support. We're also looking at something around cybersecurity. And so there's always going to be this fresh content that you can get from hubs. And so hubs are really critical in advancing these skills that we continuously talk about that youth need to empower themselves with regards to future of work. And then there's also connections that are going to be made. Many times, I've got several stories of startup founders that met their co-founders in innovation spaces. Innovation spaces tend to bring this sense of trust that comes to it. When you come in and you're really open-minded and wanting to meet people, that's where the connections begin. That's where the relationships begin. And that's where trust begins to be built. And so many times the people that become really important in helping you advance an idea that you might have will be people that you've met at a hub. And then finally, for me, it's in the ecosystems that hubs begin to catalyze within the communities. And Bethlehem spoke to this as well. The people that are closest to challenges will more likely be the people that take lead in innovating for those challenges. There are people that will more likely use the solutions that are developed towards those challenges. And so hubs have become core, or that melting pot in which an ecosystem begins to develop. You have your innovators, and then you have your researchers that are interested in exploring different ideas. And so you have academia coming in as well. You have corporates who are also looking to disrupt their work. And many times within our context, at least, we find that corporates are beginning to come into hubs to kind of collaborate on new innovative ways that they can do work within their organizations. And then there's public sector, and many of our governments are now beginning to embrace, concept of agile governance, and now beginning to embrace ways in which they can kind of fast track startups to where they can build solutions that governments can begin to take advantage of. And in many African countries, I feel that governments are the biggest buyer of tech products or innovative products that the youth are beginning to build. And so hubs tend to bring all these interesting players into one place. And I like to say that when you have all those people in one place, the worst thing that could happen is magic. It hardly ever goes wrong. And so hubs really play a critical role in bringing the right players to the table, Louise.
Fantastic. That's absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure that there are people, don't forget people online, this is your opportunity to ask questions. So please do post your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them later on. I think we need to move on. I've got lots of questions myself, but I think we need to move on to bring in our final panelist. And Gituku Ngene has been he's been collaborating with the Youth Forward Learning Partnership's work on youth and tech. And Gituku is a strategy and an innovation and a learning expert, and he's got extensive experience in sustainable development and economic transformation in frontier markets. And he's currently leading on strategy and innovation for Mercy Corps' youth employment portfolio across 17 countries in Africa. And he's focusing on driving the agency's youth employment strategy, the partnerships, the program delivery that are anchored on tech innovations, working on market systems, impact investments, and doing this in partnership with Mercy Corps' investment vehicle, which is a social venture fund, but also with local and global investment players and other stakeholders. So a really nice sort of bridge, I think, from what Nekesa was saying about the hubs. And Gituku can also talk a little bit more about what then happened, what happens next. But I just want to start. I want to check, Gituku, there might be people on this call who really aren't that familiar with the term JobTech, which I've used a couple of times. Could you start by just explaining what JobTech is exactly, and then talk about how it's affecting youth employment in the digital economy?
Sure. Thanks, Louise. When we talk about JobTech, it's a relatively new term, not necessarily a new phenomenon, but if you think about what we've seen within the innovation landscape across the world, and more specifically in Africa, we are seeing an increased use of technology to enable, to facilitate, as well as improve access to work, for populations, and particularly young populations, and so even as we think about how do we centralize and sort of have a specific definition around this phenomenon that we are seeing, then the term JobTech, or JobTech as a practice or as an area then comes into play. And this is one area that Mercy Corps, alongside multiple players within the region have started defining. And, as we see in other spaces, fintech, agri-tech, edtech has been, these have been sectors that have been quite mature and very well defined and have an ecosystem around them. And more recently, we are working with players to sort of, define a strong ecosystem around the JobTech phenomenon. And part of what we're doing, actually, recently, we just launched a website around this, which is the JobTechAlliance.com. which will be bringing different players in this ecosystem together to try and nurture and drive this innovation. But more specifically, why JobTech is critical for Africa is because we're in a continent where more than 38% of the population, at least according to ILO, are defined as the working poor. So a very big gap of young people who are looking for jobs and the availability of jobs. But even for those who are in jobs, there's a very big element of this population that is in the informal sector. Actually, in Kenya, 90% of the labor force is in the informal sector. And these are people who are invisible to services, to opportunities, both within government and private sector, and that will need to sort of be brought to the fore. And part of what we are seeing JobTech doing is really, bring these people to the surface in a way that they can get services and opportunities in a way that they couldn't before. The other thing about JobTech that we are seeing is the emergence of hyperlocal solutions, and I think Bethlehem alluded to this. And these are solutions that are very targeted towards local populations that sort of reach the grassroots when you think about young people and entrepreneurs, etc. And that are really led by young African youth and for young Africa youth. So this in itself sort of speaks to a very budding ecosystem that needs a lot of effort to sort of centralize and sort of drive forward across all elements of this ecosystem.
Thanks, Katuku. That's super insightful. I want to ask you one thing though. One of the challenges in the COVID recovery is that the people who are buying services from JobTech platforms are employing gig workers, they're also suffering. Their incomes have fallen. And so the danger is that this becomes a bit of a race to the bottom with JobTech platforms pushing down wages and pushing down social protection. And there've been court cases, certainly here in the UK and the States about that. But what are the lessons from this? And I think more importantly, are there examples of where platforms are getting this right? Because we always talk about, what are the problems, but are there some innovative examples of where JobTech is kind of getting this right?
Sure. I mean, I think COVID has really exposed, the underbelly of the gig sector and generally, like JobTech in general, from a couple of fronts. And I think, even before COVID, the issue around the race to the bottom, sort of came up, with budding platforms sort of, pushing workers on the edge. And I think we've spoken about this, for a while now around how can we achieve that balance between delivering efficient services at a fair price while ensuring that, workers, still remain resilient and are not, we don't sort of, we don't worsen their vulnerability. And one of the initiatives that, is being pushed, both by and with gig platforms is the Fair Work platform, the Fair Work initiative. Which essentially says, or is encouraging gig platforms to focus on a number of things. So one, fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, management, and fair representation of gig workers. And essentially, this is really around putting the worker at the core and really championing their interests, even as we look at supporting them. And that's also part of the focus that we'll have, amongst other things, within the JobTech Alliance, whose membership will also constitute the platforms themselves, where we sort of see how do we achieve that balance and how do we ensure that we are speaking to the workers. And I think one other area where we've seen platforms, coming in very strongly is around, looking into, the social protection of workers. So in Africa, quite a number of platforms now are, developing security mechanisms for workers, whether that's insurance. So we've seen platforms like Sandy, Safe Border, integrate solutions, around insurance and saving products into their platforms, which, are for the betterment of the workers. But we've also seen new innovators coming in and designing interesting financial products. So, for example, Imali, which is focusing on Nigeria and Kenya. There's Pezesha, which is Kenyan-based. These are platforms that have been working with gig and work platforms to ask, how do we structure products that support workers and that ensure that their vulnerability is reduced while their resilience is strengthened.
Great. So so some good examples of what's happening and where things are being done well. The questions are coming in thick and fast in the chat, so please do add your own. I've got a couple that I think maybe Nikes and Bethlehem, I might direct those at you. Somebody has asked about this, tech innovation often seems to be focused in cities, but how can we better support rural youth tech access? And I wonder if I could just expand that a little bit. And maybe, Nikes, if you could start with that, and then Bethlehem come in, about inclusivity in general. And I think Gituka was talking about the issue of fairness. But Nikes, what are your views on how to make sure that hubs and innovation centres are truly inclusive, whether that's urban, rural, whether it's disadvantaged groups, and whether it's men and women? What do you do there?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I think hubs. So hubs do several things, and it's really dependent on what their particular situation is, and so what inclusion would mean for them. And what I mean by that is that inclusion for a hub in a major city in Africa may be different for inclusion in a hub that's based in a remote area, right? And so inclusion for one example, inclusion for a hub in Nairobi might be that if we're having a program for youth or for children, then we want to make sure that we invite children from different schools to attend. So it shouldn't only be schools based in one part of Nairobi, it should be schools based from across Nairobi, right? So that might be what inclusion means for a hub in Nairobi. But if you're talking about inclusion for a hub in a rural town, in a village, then for them inclusion might be this innovative solution that we're building. How do we explain it, or that we want to build? How do we explain it in their local language, perhaps? So that's what inclusion might mean. And so that's what I mean, that it really is, you need to contextualize it to who you're speaking about, what the situation is. But my thoughts on inclusion and also on how we ensure that regardless where you are, that you do have the opportunity to innovate is in the democratization of the whole innovation process. And how we see it within the hub model is increasingly we see hubs now acting collectively. And so in Kenya, for example, you have what's called the Association of Startup and SME Enablers in Kenya. A majority of those hubs, these are hubs and other types of entrepreneurship support organizations coming together in an organized form. But what you'll see is that the majority of them are Nairobi-based. And so what has come out as a result of that is that we've had countrywide hubs association that has been launched as well. And they specifically focus on hubs that are outside of Nairobi. Not to say that their interests won't be represented by the Association of Startup and SME Enablers, but to say that if they come in as a collective, as hubs outside of Nairobi, then they begin to divert attention, rightfully, to innovation outside of Nairobi. I feel that as an ecosystem in Kenya, for example, we've really been done a disservice, and we've done ourselves a disservice by measuring our success or defining our success by what has happened in the major cities. And when we speak of the Silicon Savannah and speak about Kenya being a Silicon Savannah, I think, to be honest, we're really speaking about Nairobi being a Silicon Savannah, if at all. And so how do we unearth the innovation coming out of other ecosystems that are not in major cities, whether Nairobi or say Lagos, for example? What measures do we put in place? I think is what we need to begin thinking about. I think a great way to do it is to begin from the approach that there is innovation happening outside of major cities. It may take a different form. What innovation means to someone in a major city may be different from what it means to someone in a rural city, because it's about, again, contextualization and what makes sense for them and what solutions are they building on, right? And so if you begin from there, that innovation happens across across countries, across ecosystems, then we can then begin to pile on these other support services that you've spoken about. We can begin to pile on what other skills do they need? Do we need to disseminate information about this innovation in different languages? Do we need to look at different devices that they would need to use based on the kind of data or connectivity that they have? And so that's how you begin to include other communities when it comes to innovation. Finally, I think the other things that you'd also look at would be, for example, when it comes to using, how does this innovation, how can it be used by people with disability? You know, am I building something that can be used by people across sectors, whether male, female, whether with disability or not disability, whether they've gotten a certain skill or haven't gotten a certain skill? And if they haven't gotten that particular tech skill, then we go into digital literacy as a way of ensuring inclusion. And so that's what I meant, that it's so difficult because you just keep unpacking and unpacking things, you know, different demographics that you need to pay attention to when you're ensuring that something is truly inclusive. Yep, thanks.
Great, thank you. Very comprehensive answer. We've got a couple more questions coming in, but I forgot to open our poll. Sorry. We've got a poll on Slido, and we'd really like to hear what you think. So keep the questions coming in. But while you do that, I think, you know, the poll has now been opened, and we'd love to hear from you whether you think that digital technologies you currently use do a good job of representing the cultures, values, and needs of young people. So we don't know quite sort of the demographics of who's in the audience, but we'd really like you to think about whether what you use today, do you think represents the cultures, values, and needs of the young people that you're concerned about? So please vote away. And if you've answered somewhat or not at all, please tell us why. And you can put that in the chat. So I know, Gituku, you're quite keen to come in on this rural-urban issue, and then I want to come to Bethlehem on a question about the future of work. And then there's another question that's really getting upvoted in the chat, which is about how does hubs safeguard ideas. But maybe, Gituku, on the rural-urban question, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So on this. I just want to speak to the role that organizations like Massimo and other, philanthropic organizations could play when it comes to bridging the rural-urban gap. And we've seen this because, as much as, the JobTech ecosystem is growing, it continues to, if left unchecked, that gap will only grow wider. And part of this will be, like thinking around, and this, we've tried this at Massimo through some of our programs. Organizations like ourselves really understand these, marginalized areas, compared to the innovators. And part of what we've tried to do is handhold, the innovators through some of these landscapes that might be very unfamiliar to them. And what this involves is, working with them to pilot their solutions in these rural areas, whether that's through, grant funding or technical assistance, that really says, let's take your idea, let's test it out in a particular area, and let's see how it plays out. And so, with one such company in Uganda, we tried out, a digital platform through which, they could, support a savings mechanism for, farmers to sort of, use a layaway system to get their inputs. We also worked with a skills platform in Kenya to help, to try and see if we could, spur innovation boot camps, in secondary cities in Kenya. And to that point, it's really about how can we work with secondary cities? So, second or third tier cities away from, the major cities. And we see this as gateways to, the very rural areas. So most of the young people will try and come to, these third tier cities as, areas where they look for work. And that will be a very interesting gateway to tap into, very rural areas. Because the reality is, for digital platforms, going to those, very marginalized areas might not be practical. But when we see secondary cities as areas where we can sort of layer on the next level of innovation outside the cities, then there could be a very viable opportunity there. The last point is around infrastructure. I think that continues to be a big gap. We've run into this challenge. We are currently implementing a micro-work solution in Uganda, and the issue around infrastructure and internet connectivity has been one of our biggest drawback, and that's something that we've had to, sort of make an investment towards in partnership with Cisco to sort of support that infrastructure gap and ensure that young people in these spaces are being provided with access to the kind of innovation support and facilities that we see in the big cities.
Great, thanks, Gatuku. And I know, infrastructure is a perennial problem here. But I'd like to sort of broaden this out a little bit. And Bethlehem, I wonder, can you sort of share your thoughts about the future of work for youth in a post-COVID world, or whatever the new normal looks like, and in the context of how the opportunity for digital innovation has changed since COVID has really highlighted the digital divide in pretty much every country across the world?
That's a good question. I think the basis for me to answer this question would be a book I read, which is called The 21 Skills for the 21st Century, which I think gives a really good insight about what should we expect, because we don't really know what to expect. Because if you remember when cars first came about and people were using horses, they had no idea why these cars would be created or when they would be created. Even the jobs you see today, for example, social media management, data scientists, these are kind of the skill sets, the jobs that you didn't have imagined to become because of these new innovations and these new creations that have come about. And as humans, we have two types of skills, which is the physical and the cognitive. So a lot of things have been done in the Industrial Revolution in terms of building machines that will, kind of replace the human capability of doing those things and doing it more efficiently. And now we've come to that age where we're building AIs and we're building more intelligent machines, which are kind of handling the cognitive part of things. So what we can see is we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know what the future of work is, but what we understand is that, as I mentioned, the skill sets that are needed. So going from riding a horse to driving a car it's very easy. The training could be in a very short time. But when you think about, okay, how about, being an accountant to managing a drone, that's kind of a huge skill gap that we have there. So I think even though we don't know how the future of work is going to be, we understand what kind of skill sets there are. So that's why we need to update ourselves, and we need to get these skills. We need to give these skills to the youth so that whenever these kind of tools come up, they can adapt themselves quickly. Because COVID, what it has shown us is that, schools have become online and a lot of things have become online. And we've seen that majority of the population, especially in Africa, has been left out because of connectivity. And what you can see is that a lot of governments, as they should, are kind of delaying progress since now, because, people are losing jobs, people need connectivity to work, and these are kind of issues that kind of weigh heavily on the government, and the government have been trying to delay these process because technology is moving so fast. But what COVID has done is kind of show us, okay, this is where we are right now, and we need to improve. We need to move fast in order to make kind of a more inclusive development and growth together. So I think that's kind of my outlook on the future of work. But if people are interested, I think a huge recommendation to read the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. I think it would give a really good insight.
I think you're muted, Louise.
Yeah, it's been 16 months of me forgetting to unmute myself when I talk. I'm so sorry. So talking about the cognitive capacities, how can we make sure that people retain ownership of their ideas? So there's a question from Aramide Abe, I think, which says, what are hubs doing to safeguard the ideas shared by newbies from being poached by experienced developers or corporate entities? Nikesa, maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah, well, the first thing is just in, general information around what can actually be protected and what can't. And, we always like to give the example, I personally have my brilliant ideas, they come when I'm sharing. And so if I come up with this really brilliant idea for a thing that I want to do and I'm sharing and I go Google it, there's going to be a million other people doing it. Yeah. So where is the value of an idea is the first question that a lot of people should be asking. And then once you find that value, then yes, how do you protect it? And hubs are doing a lot of work in that space. One, they're learning exactly how to help innovators protect their ideas. And so hubs, you could think of hubs a lot as people that learn skills to pass them on. When you think of trainers, this is a lot of the work that hubs do. But then other than that, a lot of hubs now either have a lawyer or a legal firm that sits within their hubs specifically to kind of give this support to organizations and to startups. And if they don't, they definitely have lots of modules, lots of classes, around how to protect your idea. So are you talking about patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and so on? So they demystify this stuff a lot for innovators and then kind of push them in the right direction to what they should be looking to do around securing their ideas. So definitely a huge component of what hubs do now is around either directly or in collaboration with legal partners supporting innovators to protect their ideas. You're muted again.
Sorry, I was told very fiercely to mute myself when I wasn't speaking, and I'm just so enthusiastic about this panel that sorry, I can't help it. We're all human. But so that does bring me to another sort of a linked question, which is the role of universities in all of this. And the universities are sort of the traditional sort of powerhouse of sort of the cognitive skills that Bethlehem that you were talking about. What role do you see universities playing in all of this and in supporting these emerging innovation ecosystems? And have you got any good examples of existing collaborations? Bethlehem, I'll ask you that one.
Okay, so the universities are very, very essential to an ecosystem, because when we always talk about, the Silicon Valley, there's always this university at the center, which is Stanford, right? We always talk about. And these core elements of what we call an ecosystem, one of the things is talent, because, this ecosystem, especially the startup, the tech ecosystem, is highly reliant on people who can innovate, who can create, who can come up with ideas. And universities have a huge responsibility of producing that talent. As you can see, a lot of online courses are now becoming free, and a lot of people are gaining access. But in a lot of cities and in a lot of countries, still companies and organizations rely on institutions such as universities to produce talent. So I think it's really important to kind of create that collaboration and also kind of keep them updated, because since they're like huge organizations, it's usually hard to change things around. And one of the good examples I have, actually, us working with universities, is whenever we launch campaigns, and in Ethiopia, these universities have their own kind of department, which they call community service or community reach out, in which they work with high schools in the nearby area, and they also create centers where people could come and innovate, because they know these are the kids that are going to come to their universities next. So they kind of create those platforms where they come together, they learn the skill sets they need, and they kind of learn from that lessons to improve, but also kind of create new solutions for the people. We also utilize, universities are huge, they have big resources on internet, they have training centers. So we use that in order to run our multiple programs. So the universities have really been a good partner for us in Ethiopia. And since their location in Ethiopia, we have around 42 universities right now, which are huge public universities. So they're very integral to the ecosystem, the local sustainable ecosystem we're trying to build.
Thanks, Gituko. I know that you'd quite like to come in on this question of universities. I just want to say we've now got more questions in the chat than we can actually find time to answer. So I'm really sorry if we're not going to be able to answer your question. But Gituko, I know that you'd like to chime in on the role of universities, but I wondered, could you also maybe talk about the need to get some of these concepts out into different languages, into different communities, so that we really can sort of truly democratize the innovative sort of impetus that exists in every single community?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'll start with the point around universities, and then I'll come back to the inclusion question from language and getting into the grassroots perspective. Two points around the role of universities. I think in Kenya we are seeing a closer collaboration between the universities and like the private sector and the companies, more to be more specific, especially as we think about this future of work question. And Bethlehem alluded to this bit around, how do we upskill the workforce? How do we ensure that we are layering on skills for the future, both within workers who are coming into the market as well as those who are within the market. And I think for the longest time, there's been a strong focus on, the pipeline that's coming into the work market, but we often forget about workers who are within the market. And one good example of where collaboration has had quite some, interesting impact is in Kenya. We've seen collaboration between Strathmore University and private sector players like Safari.
Oh no, Gituko was getting to the really interesting bit. We'll bring him back in when his connection reconnects. But in the meantime, I think we need to. I'm sorry if you've asked a question. Gituko, you're back. You were just talking about, I think, Safaricom.
Yeah, so sorry about my connectivity. So I was just saying, those kind of partnerships where, that allow universities to upskill the labor force within existing, within the existing, the existing labor force, with skills for the future. So in that particular example, data science, AI, machine learning have been areas that, that partnership has focused on. And then more specifically, looking at your question on how do we ensure that this is speaking to local context. Can you confirm, Luis, that you can still hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can hear you. I think the connection has dropped. Yeah, Gituko, I think Gituko has frozen. Gituko. In the meantime, I think we need to move to begin to close the section. So I wonder if we could ask Bethlehem, if I can ask you, and then I'll come to you, Nikesa, for your final words. What's your sort of key takeaway message? If you had a minute to give us a soundbite, what would you say?
I would say that we need to focus on building institutions that ensure that education is provided, policies are formulated by the government and are actually implemented. So I think building these institutions, not only for the sake of now, but in longevity and making sure that we learn through the different experiences of different global players or countries, I think is really important. And as Ethiopia, as what I've seen, we have a lack of institutions. We don't see a lot of longevity, and we don't see a lot of them working towards the same goal. So I think collaborating and coming together is really important, and understanding when to collaborate and when to compete is a really, really important understanding. So that's what I would say.
Great, thank you so much. Nekesa, how about you? What's your sort of key takeaway from all of this?
I've seen a lot of the questions have alluded to how to actually get things to work and go beyond theory. And for me, it's all about the collaborations. We're all part of a whole, whether the hubs or innovators or policy makers, public sector, private sector. And the key is in finding that point of shared value where we can all begin to actually do stuff. We do have the resources. It's just a matter of using them and making stuff happen. And then specifically for the youth, I'd say there's lots of resources out there. Hubs are not for everyone. So if you don't want to walk into a hub, walk into some other space, walk into a university, something. There's lots of resources out there that you can use to your advantage. And even if you find that those resources don't exist, then my challenge to you is to create them and speak so we can hear you and make those resources exist for you. Oh, and finally, because I know we didn't get to a lot of the questions, I would really love to engage lots of wonderful questions from everyone, from Katie, from Dr. Karanja. So I'm available on nekesa@afrilabs.com. I would love to continue the conversations that they've started in the Q&A.
Fantastic, thank you so much. There's an invitation for an interaction with Nekesa, which is fantastic. Gituku, sorry we lost you, but you're back now. We're drawing to the end of the webinar, but I wonder we've just heard from Bethlehem and Nekesa, their sort of, their key takeaways from this. What would you say is your key point, your soundbite message that you'd like to leave us all with?
Sure. Hopefully the internet won't have one on me. But thanks for being so patient and understanding. Yeah, I think overall, my punchline, we see there's an opportunity around JobTech. And I think increasingly we are seeing, the continent embracing JobTech and it playing a very definitive role when it comes to the issue around the labor force and access to work. Now, it could be, it has positive and negative effects, right? A positive in the sense that, we see an opportunity to formalize the workforce, to create open opportunities, to hyper-localize the solutions for young people across the continent. But of course, it comes with, this negative connotation, which we have largely seen in the West, but which Africa has an opportunity to sort of, address early enough by putting in the right institutions, the right mechanisms to ensure that workers are protected and that they thrive within this ecosystem. And overall, I think there's that need for, players in this space to come together and build that ecosystem, which is something that we are championing within Masico. And I really encourage, anyone who's interested in this space to join us again, through the initiative website. That's the JobTech, JobTechAlliance.com. JobTech Alliance is one word. And I think overall, that collaboration between different actors will really see this sector growing and thriving over the coming years.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And delighted that your connection allowed you to rejoin us and to give us your final thoughts. That does bring us to time today on this webinar. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions, but please do email Nekesa. She's invited your questions and your comments, so please do. And just to give you the result of the poll, so the question was, do you think that the digital technologies you currently use do a good job of representing the cultures, values and needs of young people? And it's interesting, so it's about 2/3, 1/3, pretty much. So people who answered somewhat, but more needs to be done is 64%, and not at all is 24%. So I think the 24% who answered not at all, you've got your work cut out, and Nekesa was inviting you, if the space doesn't match what you need, go create it. Go create that space. But I really would like to thank Bethlehem and Nekesa and Gituku for taking time from their very hectic schedules to share their knowledge with us today. I've certainly learned a huge amount. I want to thank everybody who's here for attending, and anybody who's listening to us post-event on our SoundCloud or our YouTube channels. We know it remains a challenging year for everybody, so thank you for sharing your time and your comments and your thoughts and your questions with us today. To all of you who registered, you will be able to watch this event again on the ODI website in the coming days, or on YouTube. And we encourage you to share your content to keep the conversation going far and wide. I would like to make a special mention and to thank the MasterCard Foundation and the Youth Forward Learning Partnership team and all the young people across the African continent who shared their perspectives with the team during the Youth Forward project. And without them, the research that has been done would neither be for youth or by youth. So special shout out to the MasterCard Foundation for that. And I think that's it. We're at the end of the webinar. So I want to thank everybody for joining, and particularly our three very distinguished panelists. We hope you have a great rest of the week, and look forward very much to meeting you all again soon. Thank you so much. Thanks and goodbye.